Welcome back, Wanderers, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Today we're diving into the early days, the delicate, chaotic, and exhilarating process of building a studio from the ground up. Our guest is a returning voice you may recognize, Willem Delventhal. Willem is a developer, storyteller, community builder, and indie advocate whose insights always stir the pot in the best way. He's been helping shape emerging creators and studios for years, and lately he's been thinking a lot about something we're seeing more often: juniors founding their own studios, not after years in the industry, but right out of the gate. In this episode, we'll explore how to properly scope your studio's first project, not just from a production perspective, but narratively. How do you tell a story that's meaningful, but also doable? What should that first game say? And how do you keep it from collapsing under its own ambition? So let's get into it. Willem, thank you for joining me once again.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be back again, Gerald.
I am excited to talk to you. It's been a hectic half a year since we've talked last, and I want to catch up on everything that's going on. But today we're gonna talk about this trend that I've seen and noticed, but you really put a pin in it when you brought this up the other day. This trend of juniors founding studios as a way to get in, and not waiting around saying, "Hey, I'm going to plant my flag and at least try and figure this thing out." And that's fascinating. So, tell me, when did you notice this? What do you think is driving this trend?
Yeah, absolutely. As somebody who, so I've been teaching games development for a long time now. I think I'm on year 6 or 7. And so I've taught quite a few developers. And so I'm also plugged into the junior development scene and the indie development scene quite heavily. And I can definitely say anecdotally that I have seen a heavy number of juniors founding studios. The stat that I looked up for this is that between now and 2019, we're seeing about 600% more studios created every year. So in the past 5 years, we're seeing more than a 5x increase in the number of games getting founded every year. New studios, I should say, not just games. Right. Now, I think that the driving force behind this trend is kind of obvious, and I'm not sure I need to talk about it, which is the game industry has been rough. It's frankly the only option for a lot of juniors at this point in time who dream of working in games in one form or function. Only about 1 in 100 junior developers will find a job at a professional studio in 12 months of applying. So over a full year, only 1 out of every 100 people trying to pursue this dream will actually make it happen. Now, that's a little depressing, but I have an alternative stat for you, which is that for a brand new studio, about 7 in 100 will make enough money to justify a second game. This doesn't mean that they're supplementing their income 100%. Probably most indie studios work a second job at first, at least for the first couple of years. So that doesn't mean they're making enough money to have $100,000 in the bank and buy a house, but making enough money to continue to exist. So 7 versus 1, I think, is a bigger number. If I've done my math correctly here. So yeah, frankly, it's necessity. And then besides the necessity, it's also what I have come to describe as a fine, we'll do it ourselves attitude. The world is dark and confusing and a little scary right now, and the game industry is as well. And I view founding your own studio and saying, I'll do it despite this, I'll pursue the dream despite these stats, as one of the greatest acts of resistance that a person can actually do. I'm going to create my art and bring beauty into the world despite the insanity. So I think it's a mindset shift, and it's a necessity.
Beautiful. Well, we're looking for advice and insights and all these wonderful things as we go through this process. I guess to narrow it into what's near and dear to my heart, which is narrative, of course. Let's talk about some of the challenges, some of the pitfalls. Yes. When you're starting out as a junior, is it possible to dream too big, especially with narrative? But in general, can you bite off more than you can chew? What are some of the common storytelling and narrative pitfalls that you fall into early on?
Yeah. No, I've never known a single junior to ever bite off more than they can chew.
We all do it.
I've never done it myself. No. Yes. It's funny. I think the greatest pitfall is exactly what you just described. I think the greatest pitfall is trying to tell too big a story, trying to create too big a universe, trying to basically trying to compete with those grand stories that the AAAs tend to deliver to their audiences. It's really tempting because we are creatives, we're artists, we have so many different ideas that we've collected, built, created over our lifespans, and as a result of the beautiful art forms that we've digested over our times. But those stories are frankly not all the right story to tell. And a lot of the time, the main reason that they're the wrong story to tell is because you just don't have the scope, the possibility, the actual effort you can put into a game, number of man hours you can put into a game to tell a story that is that big. A lot of juniors will kind of invent a whole new universe and try to tell its whole history all at once. And what I want to say to everybody here and all those fresh founders is you can tell a small story and keep it really compelling. My example here actually is Baldur's Gate 3, which is that's a very small story. Yeah.
Small. Yeah.
Small. But I'm actually trying to juxtapose it a little bit. So Baldur's Gate 3 had 500 people, right, for 7 years. So that means if you were going to solo dev Baldur's Gate 3, it would take you, I don't know, what's 7 times 500? That many years.
35,000?
Many. Yeah, right. So probably you're not going to make a Baldur's Gate 3. And even in Baldur's Gate 3, the story is actually pretty small-ish. Obviously, it's still a grand scale story, but it's basically like, I got a worm in my head. I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of it. And then I defeated the biggest worm, you know?
Right.
That's still actually not as grand as, like, I don't know, an Avengers Endgame or whatever the heck you might have in your head right now that you want to tell.
Right. So it sounds like you're talking about intention. What is your intention with this story and being laser focused so that you can create something that's within the scope of your small indie studio?
Yeah, I would say that is 100% correct.
Okay, so how do you figure out what is the right size for a debut game for a small indie studio?
Yes, good question. I had a thought about this one. I think my recommendation is to start with an emotional deliverable before you ever get to a specific story. So you might have something that you really want to tell. Oh, man, I really want to tell. Actually, one of my favorite ones recently, a studio came up to me to ask for advice on their pitch deck, and they're telling the story of I'm going to butcher what it's called, like the Cancer Krieg, I think, which is basically, it's a big metal beast that the Russians invented to explore Antarctica.
Right.
And so like that is like, you know, that doesn't, air quotes here, that doesn't matter. The world is not going to end if the metal beast doesn't get far enough. But it's still like this fascinating little story. And the emotions that story delivers, are like easy to describe. There's probably some claustrophobia. There's a sense of danger and intrigue. There's a mystery. I'm sure you can deliver all kinds of little interesting moments while you're in your metal rolling box across the Arctic tundra. And I think if you start first by saying, okay, this is how I want to make my players feel, you can then much more easily rein in the natural scope creep that you're going to have. You're going to want to tell this massive story, but as long as I deliver that feeling of claustrophobia, I've succeeded. How can I deliver that feeling that I've decided I want my player to have in as small a package as possible?
That's brilliant. It reminds me, I was talking to a dev a couple years ago, and they said that they like to create an emotional moment that's going to be their touchstone to work towards and to reflect on everything else. And it sounds similar to identifying what is that moment that you're trying to create, and then how do you work towards it?
Yeah, I think that's right. In fact, that brings to mind a different piece of advice I might give, which is also to define your narrative systems before you jump into the grand scale of the story and define the whole story. So start first with, how can your game realistically actually deliver story? Am I going to include cutscenes? Am I going to include barks? Am I going to have fully featured dialogue? Am I going to have branching endings? If you define systemically the different methods with which your game can actually deliver story, then you have that bounding box to fit the story within. So if I know I want claustrophobia, and I know that all I can actually deliver that with is environmental storytelling and lore dumps, then you have a much firmer grasp of how to actually fit your story into your game in a manageable way for your own workload.
Brilliant. Just to underline this, can you think of examples in games you play, games out there where this has been done. Like for me, Binding of Isaac comes to mind. You know, it tight, but so powerful. Like just hits you in the chest. Can you think of them without, you know, maybe I stole yours, but
No, that's a good one. I've got two. So the first one is much more relatable and doable, which is A Short Hike. Short Hike is a beautiful, wonderful little story. You can beat that game in 3 hours, and it winds. I think that they did exactly what I'm talking about. They went, okay, how do we leave our players feeling like they can do it? How do we leave our players feeling like they believe in themselves? And then everything else followed that. Everything else, fit that objective. My other example, which is humongous and unattainable for all of you, but I think is still a great example, is actually Elden Ring. That is not a small story at all, but I think it's a fantastic example of sort of like utility of storytelling or like efficiency of storytelling. There's cutscenes and all kinds of stuff that you as a solo dev or a small dev team won't be able to build, but they tell so much of their story just through item descriptions and the environment. You walk into a space and there's a bunch of giants that are 5 times your size on stakes, and you're like, I don't know what happened here, but something happened here. You know, that is something, that kind of like piecemeal, almost mystery storytelling that you can absolutely put in your game.
it feels like you really need to be paying attention, looking for those little opportunities to add without having to scope, like make your scope expand. Like I think of Diablo, the first Diablo came out and we got items and they had little write-ups in them about, it was like, who's worked? Why did he lose his leg? Like,
yes,
those little pieces just are brilliant.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. They aggregate together in a way. I'm going to take us aside, but I promise it makes sense. The Blair Witch Project is a great example of this, because the Blair Witch Project is stupid low budget. The reason that you never see the bad guy, the witch, in Blair Witch Project is because they couldn't afford any kind of effects. So instead, they just didn't show you. And as a result, the Blair Witch Project is terrifying because the player, in this case, the viewer, is filling the gaps. They wind up deciding what the bad witch looks like, or in the case of Elden Ring, they wind up deciding, why these giants must be here, and that has an interesting effect. It personalizes the experience for the player, because I'm going to decide that this means something different than you might decide it means, and I'm going to decide that that witch looks like this, which is terrifying to me, and you're going to decide it looks like something else. So that has this high efficiency value where you've actually, as a developer, put in less work, but allowed your player to have a better, more personalized experience.
Brilliant. Writing that down. I love it. Okay, well, here's a slightly different take on the whole topic. My marketing branding brain starts working, and I start thinking the first game that an indie studio puts out, it's kind of like you're staking your flag. You're saying, this is who we are. You're talking about studio identity and brand identity. Does that become a consideration, or should that be an afterthought, or should that not even enter the picture? I don't know.
It is a very good question. I am so grateful that you gave me the opportunity to talk about this, because it's one of my favorite things. Yes. So, telling that first story absolutely matters, and taking a moment to decide what the identity of your studio actually is absolutely matters. The biggest piece of advice I can give that is really simple, and you've probably heard 100 times, is to niche yourself as much as possible. For somebody who's just getting started, that's scary. When I first got started, I resisted the idea of being anything in particular. I'm not just a game designer. I also code, and I write cool stories, and I animate stuff, whatever. Right. I see that so many times with the people that I work with, and I get it, because it doesn't feel good to be pigeonholed when we're naturally creative beings that want to touch everything. But when you look instead, when you're talking about viability, when you're trying to build a company that could actually have legs and financially support you one day, you have to think about the player psychology. And if they're looking at a studio that has 15 different games and every game is dramatically different, there's not much of a reason for them individually, that one human, to play your other games. If they fell in love with this game and your second game is completely different, then why would they play it? They don't like that kind of game. Maybe they're a deck building player and your second game is like something dramatically different, a first person shooter or something like that. So by niching yourself and identifying what your studio is for and who your studio is for, you wind up tying into that player psychology. The kind of person who loved this game is going to love that game too. There's a couple of great examples of this. I really love Devolver Digital here. They're the creators of Cult of the Lamb and Inscription and Hotline Miami. Their games are different. Cult of the Lamb is way different than Inscription. But that sort of like gritty, like mind-bending, chaotic feeling that they deliver is always there. And so I can pretty confidently as a player assume that if I liked Cult of the Lamb, I'm going to like Inscription, even though they're different kinds of games. Chucklefish is also a great example. Chucklefish wound up taking over Stardew Valley. They also worked on Starbound. Now they're making Witchbrook, which people are super pumped about. And they basically always make these comfortable, content, happy, cozy games. And so once again, I know I'm going to like Witchbrook because I loved Stardew Valley. Right. So for all of you new studios out there, that's really what it's about. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself per se. You just have to identify what kinds of games are going to deliver and who they're for and keep that message the same. And early on, when you're first figuring this out and you're not confident, it's totally okay for you to iterate and be wrong the first couple of times, but you'll start to pick it up. You'll be like, oh, yes, this feeling, this emotion, or this objective is absolutely what my studio is for.
Mm-hmm. And document all that stuff. Write it down so you have a brand diary. And I personally would recommend, there's lots of processes out there for discovering avatar and customer psychographics and brand identity, all this stuff. There's lots of books and exercises on them. Do these things. They're worth the time.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, do a little homework at the beginning. And it's not that hard to know what you're doing. One of the biggest things you can do, everybody, is to identify who your target audience is, which I hesitate to even use that term because I feel like it can dehumanize a little bit. It's just, who are your players? Who are the people that you represent and want to make games for? And know exactly who they are.
Who's your tribe?
Yeah.
100%. Oh yeah, let's shift gears for 3 seconds here. In larger studios, narrative is just a piece that often works in tandem with everything else. They have their own. But in small studios or even solo efforts, even the writer could be the designer, the producer could be the audio. Like, you could wear multiple hats, you could wear all the hats, but there's a lot more fluid moving around. What's your advice for somebody getting into founding or into an indie studio where narrative is just one hat or narrative just one piece of what they have to do?
Right. Yes. How does a solo dev both make really cool gameplay and great art and a great story?
There. That's a better way to say the question. Love it.
Yes, I get it. Yeah. Tough one. Get it. I think I'm going to echo back and repeat myself a little bit, which is just thinking about efficiency of time. I think the biggest, there's a lot of challenges to being a game developer. I think like the biggest reported problem is just discoverability, which makes sense, trying to get people to play your games. But if we're talking about the development of a game, the project management of a game, I would, from my perspective, say that the biggest challenge is overscoping and underestimating how much time stuff is going to take. I think we've all started a project that was supposed to take 2 months and it took literally years. I have my brother is also a developer. He made a mobile game that the whole reason he picked that project was because it was only supposed to take 6 months and it literally took him 4 years to get the thing onto the App Store. It happens and it's pretty normal. So I think efficiency of time is the biggest thing. I'm a huge advocate with people who are just getting started in games to identify release dates and stick to them. That's one of the biggest things you can do for yourself. It's more valuable as a practice to keep to those dates than it is to continue to push back the deadline. As you get more experienced, you can consider moving the deadline. But at first, I think you should absolutely stick to your deadlines. Whatever you can make in that time period is what gets launched. Your first couple of games are going to be not very good. That's okay. Or probably anyway, you might blow me away. I don't know. But if you think about that efficiency of time, you can do a couple of things to help yourself stay within the box. So the first thing is what I mentioned earlier, which is to identify your narrative systems. So if you're halfway through the project, halfway through your timeline, and you're like, "Ooh, it'd be so cool to add a cutscene." That's the kind of thing that causes something to take 4 years instead of 6 months. If instead, right at the beginning, you make yourself a nice game design document, and it says, "All right, these are the exact ways that I'm going to tell a story. We're not going to have cutscenes. Instead, we're going to have barks, and we're going to have whatever the heck else, branching narrative." Then that means you can better estimate how long it's going to take you to do everything, and you can better tell the story because you go, okay, well, here are my tools to tell the story. I was brainstorming for in prep for this episode what I think are some of the most highly efficient narrative delivery systems. And I think the 3 I would give are lore items. So that's what we were just talking about. Anything that delivers narrative via small, discrete pieces of text. So your item descriptions and things like that, or finding a piece of paper out in the wild that has a little bit of story. That is so easy to implement, and you can get so much bang for that. Environmental storytelling is another big one. However your game plays, hide stuff in the environment, set it up in a way that tells the story. If you have in your head this grand battle that happened 500 years ago and established the dynasty, you don't need to tell me any of that. Just show it to me, put it in the world. And then finally, micro choices. So that basically just means dialogue choices that don't actually change outcomes. So give me a couple of options, but have it still move down the same linear path of narrative. Because that, as a player, feels like I'm making a choice, but the scope still stays small.
Right. Again, it's about efficiency, making things do more than one job. Those dialogue has multiple purposes, and that piece of environment has multiple purposes, and make narrative one of those purposes.
100%. Yeah, exactly. However you can fit narrative in matters too. I think there's a lot of, you can get a lot of value narratively with really small tweaks. One of the ones somebody told me at some point is just change your menu buttons. Instead of having it be start game, have it be embark upon the quest, or, something like those little teeny tiny tweaks can flavor your whole world a lot more.
Nice. All right. I'm going to get you to pull out your crystal ball there, Wizard Man. What do you think what impact will this trend have on stories in games moving forward? There may not be an answer. This might be a little out there, but this trend towards young, junior, or not young maybe, but junior devs founding their own studios, figuring this out as they go, creating new stuff. What impact could this have on narratives in games moving forward?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that this is going to wind up doing. This also this pulls in some of the technology changes we're seeing in games like AI. I think we're at a point where indie is going to become much more regular. There was an article pretty recently about how PlayStation is trying to change how they're doing a bunch of their games as a result of what happened with Clair Obscura. Indies and smaller teams, Clair Obscura is still 30 people, I think, have more power individually than they ever have had before. And in some ways that creates problems. The discoverability problem, frankly, will probably only get worse. How do you get eyeballs when you're competing with thousands of other games? But undeniably, it means that one person is more potent. And so hopefully what it winds up meaning is that smaller teams can deliver more compelling packages. I think this also winds up meaning that our stories become smaller, shorter, more digestible in a media-filled world where short-form video and short-form content in general has become so much more popular. We are also seeing a trend towards shorter games. In the Foundry program at the Indie Game Academy, we specifically asked that the games not be longer than 5 hours of total playtime. So 3 to 5 hours is what we're targeting, that $10 price range. And we're seeing a lot of games, A Short Hike was my example here, that are so small and yet leave such a massive impact on us because we're all busy, we have busy lives, and it's hard for us to want to commit to a 50-hour experience that we're not sure we're going to like. I don't know how many times I started The Witcher 3, which people can crucify me for if you want, that's okay. But unfortunately, it just never hooked me enough to play through that whole game.
It's a long game.
It's a long game. Yeah, and there's some real evidence of this too. I went looking for some stats on this, and I couldn't find any great stats, but there's at least a couple examples. Flux Games is a Brazilian publisher that actually just started a new brand label called Short and Sweet. So they deliberately release these short, small, bite-sized games. Media released an article recently about how AA companies are doubling down on these smaller, shorter games. We've also seen cozy games, of course, be such a huge rise, and cozy games tend to be short and sweet. We've had like a massive increase in them. The stat I found here was 15 titles on Steam labeled cozy in 2020. It's now 373.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. So absolutely. I think basically people are just kind of time poor. And then also I think it's hard to ask somebody to commit to 50 hours unless they already know they're going to love it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I love novels, but I still also read short stories.
Right.
What do you want?
Yeah.
It makes me think of early 2000s when D&D went open source and suddenly everybody could publish, and you had thousands of publishers putting out, and I'm going to be honest, crap. There was so much garbage. But then you also had Monty Cook Games come out of it. You had Kobold Press come out. Like, you had Paizo come out of it. And so there were these pillars of quality where people came together and made great stuff on basically indie format and have become giants in their own So maybe there will be good stuff come out of it, but you're right. There will be a lot lost in the mass as well.
Yeah, I think I love that as an example because it's a good one. I think maybe I recently actually wrote a post about the video game crash of 1983. We saw the stats are wild, by the way. I didn't know these before. We were worth $3 billion before this crash as an industry, which is baby. We're now worth about $200 billion. But still, we were like a young, hot, upcoming industry at $3 billion. The next year, we were worth $100 million. Ooh. We had a 95% drop in value over 1 year. That is crazy. And the crash is, as always, many different factors. But one of the factors that seems to be the most quoted or the most prevalent is basically just drop in quality. That people started to see this young, hot industry. And so they were like, well, I'm going to get in on that and make a game too. And they pumped out a bunch of shitware, a bunch of games that just weren't worth playing. And then if we're talking about that player psychology again, at that point, video games were young and hot. They were new. It wasn't an established art form yet. And so when suddenly the average consumer decides to try a game, and because there's so much crap out there, on average, it's going to be a bad game, they're going to stop playing. The fad has broken. The bubble has popped. So I think we're kind of in that same time period. I think a lot of publishers are pulling back because money is a little bit more scarce and they're a little bit more scared. But I think like a lot of them have kind of earned that. There's a lot more bad games out there that are chasing trends than there are people who have built just like beautiful experiences for each other. Discoverability is hard, but yeah, if you start with a great game, you increase your odds by so much.
And to call back to the beginning, if you do audience identification and you spend the time to make sure you know what you're building and who it's for, that's going to help you so much with that discoverability as well.
Yeah. If you know exactly, if you make a game, I don't know why I use this as an example all the time, but if you make a game for single dads who love camping, right, then you could go find single dads who love camping. If you make a game for 30-year-old men, like, I guess I can post anywhere, but it's so much less specific than like, oh, I'm going to go to that forum for hiking, right? So yeah, who is your game for? Exactly who? Like, define it as well as you can and keep it as human as you can. Who is this person? And like, love them. That's what we do. We make wonderful things for each other.
Yeah. You've filled me with positivity again. There is a ray of sunshine. Love it.
That is right.
I'm gonna bring the core topic to a close. There's still some fun stuff I'll hit on the way out the door, but
yeah,
just to bring it to a close, I want to flip it for a second. If you're an indie studio developer, first time, you're a junior, but you're not narrative, your specialities in one of the areas, that's not one of your hats. What should you keep in mind when it comes to helping your narrative department or getting somebody involved to tell a story? Is story important for that person? And I want the outside view on narrative in that setting.
Interesting. I think we did a lecture a long time ago about game design with a professor from a local game company. And he gave a really simple quote that I've used since then, which was, everything is game design. And I think as I've gotten further in my own career, I've come to believe that kind of everything is everything. So everything is narrative design, just like everything is game design. Everything is visual design, just like everything is game design. So that's maybe what I would say to that person who's not a narrative designer, but wants to contribute to a meaningful, wonderful story. Every little tiny aspect of your craft, of your expertise that you put into the game is absolutely a part of the narrative experience that the player has. And this is one of the reasons I find it critically important. This is one of the things I tell people all the time, that you identify those emotional objectives and your gameplay pillars. What are you trying to get your player to experience? Because if your whole team agrees upon that, then you can figure out, Mr. Engineer, how to modify your code to feel a little bit more like that. You can figure out, whoever else is on the team, a visual designer, how to change the art style so that it reflects that. If it's a feeling of claustrophobia, maybe you wind up designing the game to be a little bit more repetitive and feels like you're stuck and can't really make progress. If you want your game to be more cozy, maybe you are writing dialogue that feels a little bit more open-ended and happy and, mission-driven. So I think that's maybe the biggest piece of advice I would give is don't underestimate your impact on the game and what the player receives. And don't underestimate how what you feel and what your collaborators feel in the room also translates to the player. Because if you're in the room having a great time and feeling that feeling of claustrophobia, they'll feel it at the other end. John Romero and John Carmack, the creators of Doom, filled their room. They blacked out all their curtains. They put up satanic imagery and they blasted death metal while they made Doom. We feel it on the other end. That's what art is.
Right. Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful holistic approach. Like everything affects everything. Everything is everything. I love that. I'm stealing it. Put it on a t-shirt.
Do it. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's as much as I can pull out of your brain today on that topic. I'm sure I'll have you back again someday. You're one of my regulars now.
Sweet. I'm down.
I have a philosophical question I usually ask in this space. You've already answered it twice, so I had to come up with something new for you.
Okay.
So this is something new. Let's see. So when a new studio releases its first game, complete with its first story, it's more than a project. Like we've hinted at this. It's a declaration, a manifesto. It's planting the flag.
Yeah.
Why, in your opinion, do these early stories matter? What power do they hold, those sparks in the dark, as compared in a world full of those massive franchises and big Baldur's Gate 3 stories? Why do these little flashings, why do these the long hikes matter?
Yeah. I'm really happy with this as a modified philosophical outro. Okay. Because it's a great question. I've decided to split this into two different lenses. So first, I'm going to talk about why it matters to the studio, to you, the developer. And then second, I'll talk about why it matters to the wider world. I think for the studio, it matters because it is a part of your story. Think back to my two favorite examples are Dragon Ball Z, which is crazy well-known IP now, started as a manga about a little boy with bat wings. Look up the first mangas. They were super weird. Yeah. But that is like a wonderful part of the story. That is a wonderful part of why Dragon Ball Z is so phenomenal. And then my second favorite example here is Warhammer 40K. I'm a huge lover of Warhammer 40K. I love getting dorky with my buddies and playing with little plastic army men. And that game started as just a magazine about other people's games. And it slowly built into the juggernaut that it is today. The reality is every story that you tell, no matter how it goes, if it completely flops and two people play it and your mom says, good job, is still a part of your stepping stones, of your story. And even if your story, I think a lot of people say this kind of thing and they say, one day you'll be on the TED stage talking about it. Even if your story never gets to that kind of a point, which not all people's stories should, it's a part of your story. I'm saying you on your deathbed will look back to that game that you released, no matter how it went, and go, man, that was a pretty cool little step. And then if we want to pull out, if we want to increase the lens and talk about why it matters to the world, I truly believe that in aggregate, indie developers are the ones who will revitalize the game industry. I truly believe that we're in another 1983. And that we, as a games industry, are kind of shook right now. We're shell-shocked. We've had a crazy couple of years outside of games. And we're like, well, I don't even know what's happening next. This is why funding is so much lower. This is why so many games are getting canceled. So many people are getting laid off because everybody is kind of like pulling back. Everybody's turtling up. Everybody's like, I don't even know. And during that time period, it is the intrepid explorers, the indie developers, the people who say, screw it, I'm going to do it myself, who will actually flip the script and change the industry. And any individual studio will have phenomenal chances of failure. Any individual studio will probably fail. You know, even if we use that 7 out of 100, that means 93 are not making a second game. But in aggregate, all of you together, all of us together, will be the ones that revitalize and bring new, fresh blood, new energy, new life, and a new public belief in games that we frankly desperately need. So I encourage you, even though perhaps you will not get to where you would hope to get to go for it anyway. This is resistance. This is bring your art and beautiful, beautiful work into the world. Yes, do it.
That is, I might have to change my question. Regular. Wow, dude, you blew me away there. Yep. There's nothing I can add to that. That's perfect.
Okay, cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Before we start heading out the door, though, I do like to open up a little space for signal boosting. What do you got going on, or and in the past, what's coming up that we need to know about? What's happening?
Yeah. So, I'm Willem. Hi. I do a number of things. I work in industry. And then I also run a school, the Indie Game Academy. So I'll plug right here for a second the Discord. If you want to join, we are deliberately a place for indie founders and juniors, people who are just getting started and looking for collaborators. We do a bunch of stuff, a lot of free events and silliness and goofiness and good stuff. But the main thing I would actually like to plug, we started an experiment about a year ago now, called the Indie Game Foundry, where we took 3 of our best student teams and have acted as their publishers. We are largely advising more than anything else. And so we're signal boosting however the heck we can. And those 3 games are going to Kickstarter on October 15th. So I will give you the link, sir. But I would super appreciate everybody to at least follow the pages. Consider backing, definitely, but even if you don't back, the algorithm is ever present in our lives these days, and every follower boosts how many people will actually see those campaigns. So please help out some Foundry folks.
Indeed. I will throw the links in the show notes, and I will also probably do some posts to let people know that this is happening, because this is important. Indie games of the future, man.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Let's do it. We got it.
Well, I can't think of another excuse to keep you on the line, so I'm going to push you out the door. Do you have any? I'd love to give you the last word. Do you have any parting words of wisdom? You've given us so much already, but maybe a little joke or a recipe or something about life on the way out the door.
Don't let go of your childhood. I truly believe. I think it is tempting to become pessimistic during dark times. I think choosing optimism during dark times is a real act of bravery. Don't let the sparkle fade. There's a reason children are so happy and excited. I recently bought a guidebook for Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages, Game Boy Color game from freaking Scholastic Books. Y'all remember that? Just because I had it when I was a kid. I was like, oh yeah, don't let the sparkle fade. Maybe that's my last message. You got it.
And that wraps up another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Willem, thank you for returning and continuing to champion those small teams, big ideas, and stories that actually fit into the size of the game that they live in. And to you, dear listeners, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. If this episode lit a creative spark for you, hey, share it with your team, your co-devs, your studio in progress. There's room for your story too, and someone out there needs to hear it. But until next time, keep telling stories, playing games, and creating worlds worth getting lost in. Stay safe out there, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.